As I mentioned earlier, quite a number of laws in this chapter relate to the 8th commandment. The first is from verses 1 to 4. At first sight, this law on divorce and remarriage seems to be more related to the 7th commandment, and that's true. But interestingly, it is also related to the 8th commandment. Now, much can be said about these verses. We don't have time to look at it in great detail, but one important thing we need to understand about it is that it is a case law. The first 3 verses describe the situation, while verse 4 contains the actual law itself. In other words, we should understand the first 3 verses as describing the situation that has arisen in the land, and this is what the law requires in verse 4. The law states that the first husband is forbidden from taking back the wife whom he found no favor with after she subsequently divorced or else widowed. In other words, he divorced her, she went to marry someone else, and that someone either divorced her too or else he died. The first husband, according to the law, may not take her again to be his wife. And that's what this law is primarily about. But why? You may ask, why may he not take her back? Well, various commentators have suggested various reasons. But one of the reasons, I believe, perhaps may not be the only explanation, but certainly one that is valid, I think, that the law is really seeking to protect the woman from being financially exploited by the first husband. You see, she may have received an inheritance due to her second husband's death, or she may have received a sum from him as part of the divorce settlement. And the first husband may be motivated to take her back simply because of financial reasons or financial gain, which will be a form of financial exploitation. And this might explain why this law is set among other laws that are related to the 8th commandment. Then the next law in this chapter has to do with a man being exempted from military service or other public duties for 1 year after marriage. And this is so that time with his wife would not be, as it were, stolen, and they would not be robbed of the opportunity of having a child, which was very important. And then in verse 6, we have a law about not taking a person's millstone as a pledge or a collateral for a loan. The reason is that the millstone was a necessary tool for the preparation of daily bread. The law thus protected a person from being robbed of his means of support or livelihood. And then in verse 7, we find a law forbidding stealing or kidnapping another Israelite and selling him as a slave. Kidnapping was a capital crime because it represented the worst form of stealing. And then there are other laws in this chapter related to the 8th commandment, such as not intruding into someone's home to take his pledge, but waiting outside for that person to bring the pledge to you. Verses 10 and 11. Or not taking his outer garment or raiment as a pledge, verses 12 to 13. Not withholding a person's rightful wages, especially if he's poor, verses 14 and 15. And not stealing from the poor by harvesting everything, but rather leaving something for them to glean, verses 19 to 22. Now, one thing we are reminded in all of this is that the 8th commandment can be broken in a multitude of different ways, and not simply in the more traditional ways. But another thing that we learn is that even in the law, we see the mercy and the kindness and the compassion of the Lord, especially for those of his people who are weak, who are helpless, who are easily oppressed or easily taken advantage of. The people were to remember what the Lord had done for them in time past, and then they were to go and do likewise. Lord, enable us to do that as well, to remember the great mercies and the kindnesses of the Lord, and then to be merciful and kind to others as well. Amen. We turn to Psalm 78.